Izzy, how are you? There you are. I'm so glad to see you. What are you reading? This week I wanted to share the Seaside Knitters Mystery series by Sally Goldenbaum. The first one is Death by Cashmere. I found this through Goodreads.com. On Goodreads, there's a tab where you can explore their website. You can look up quotes from various authors, look for more books or recommendations. One thing that's really cool is that you can enter giveaways for books. Sometimes they're an advanced reader's copy, but sometimes publishers are hoping to reissue and stir up excitement for authors that have been in their repertoire for a long time. So sometimes you can get a new book to read to add to your library. And that's where I saw Sally Goldenbaum's books. So I want to go ahead and get started reading the very first chapter. This is a seaside town. That's why Seaside Knitters Mystery comes from. It's set in Massachusetts, and it's about a knitting store. I hope you like it. This is KNITLIT, a mystery within that genre, and I hope you like it. Chapter 1. Early Thursday morning. Izzy Chambers stood with her hands on her hips, staring hard at the ceiling. Crashing thumps from the floor above sent tiny flecks of paint floating to the floor. The music was loud too, screeching, unrecognizable words, and a freight train, loud bass that Izzy could feel in the pit of her stomach. Behind her, Nell Endicott, 30 years Izzy's senior, felt the same vibrations, but perhaps with more weight. Had she been back in Kansas, there'd be no doubt in Nell's mind that a tornado was pummeling down to crash her niece Izzy's small knitting shop. But neither she nor Izzy was in Kansas. They were in Sea Harbor, Massachusetts, and tornadoes were rarely spotted in the sleepy oceanside town. "Maybe she's rollerblading," Izzy said. She grimaced at the continuing noise. "Rollerblading is a lot better than some of the thoughts that passed through my head." "Oh, phooey. Let's not worry about it," Izzy said, spinning around on her newly knitted socks and facing her aunt. Angie's rambunctious, that's all. She's usually not so noisy." A new sound, a series of heavy clunks, caused the track lighting to quiver and brought May Anderson rushing in from the front of the store. Izzy held up her hands to shush her sales manager before she could say anything. "May, it's just a little music." "A little music, Izzy, made Laura Danvers' baby cry, and how loud it is up at the cash register. And Laura left without buying the yarn she'd been waiting weeks for." Izzy sighed. "I'll drop Laura's yarn by her house later, May." Nell could feel Izzy's frustration. The young mom wasn't Izzy's most patient customer, but she was certainly one of Izzy's best, and Izzy couldn't afford to offend her. The bell above the front door jingled, and May hurried off to help a new customer, but her eyes told Izzy that she needed to do something, and soon. Priding herself on her senior status, May didn't hesitate to tell her young boss how things should be done. Nell looked up at the ceiling again. The music was softer now, but heavy shoes, boots maybe, clunked back and forth across the floor above. "Thicker carpet," Izzy told herself. "No, sweetie," a lilting voice from the doorway chimed. "Thicker skin. That's what you need. Angie Archer needs to move on." Bertie Favazza, the oldest member of the Thursday night knitting group, stood in the doorway, a diminutive woman of nearly 80. Bertie stood straight, her chin lifted and her eyes bright. A short cap of silver hair outlined her small, fine-boned face. "Landlords need to be tough, darlin'," and said as she walked into the room. "She's a good tenant, Bertie. She's probably just had a rough day at work." Izzy scooped up stray pins and measuring tapes and tossed them into a wicker basket on the table. Bertie shook her head in clear discernment and walked briskly across the room to a worn leather couch. Her bulky backpack landed on the floor, a bottle of wine protruding from the top of the pack, and Bertie pulled it out, putting it on the coffee table in front of her. "I'm here to knit and snack and share a glass of this fine, very fine muscatet, Izzy. Not to judge you, dear, but you told me not to rent to the apartment to Angie, and "You're not quite ready to admit I'm right," Bertie said in a distinct accent that blended fine breeding with a salty touch inherited from a sea captain grandfather. She tugged her bright yellow cable-knit sweater closer around her diminutive frame and tenderly pulled out a ball of caveat yarn from her bag. She fingered its softness with still nimble fingers, and pondered aloud whether to make a shawl or a scarf out of the luxurious wild berry yarn. "A shawl," Nell suggested. She looked around the studio. Nell knew exactly why Izzy liked having Angie living above the knitting shop. When they had turned the broken-down bait shop into the Seaside Knitting Studio the winter before, Izzy had decided to move into a cozy New England cottage a short bike ride away, leaving the apartment space above her shop empty. "This shop could easily become my whole life," she had told Nell. "I need to build in distance." But she liked having someone live above the shop, and when Angie moved back to town and was looking for a place, it seemed a perfect match. Nell had agreed. Bertie was wrong this time. Sometimes she clung to old memories a tad too firmly, Nell thought. She was remembering a young, wild Angie, but college and graduate school had intervened. Angie had mellowed, and in Nell's opinion she was a fine tenant. "Angie loves living here," Izzy said, rummaging around in a side drawer for a pair of scissors and some extra needles. "And how could she not, sweetie?" Bertie said. "Your apartment is a bit of heaven." Nell looked out of the east windows, the same view Angie could see from the apartment above. A rectangle of mullioned windows framed the harbor, an expanse of endless ocean beyond, wild and churning one day and smooth silken blanket the next. Nell thought the building was worth most anything for the view alone. She remembered standing in that same room the year before, Izzy at her side. The realtor, brushing dust off her taupe suit, had stepped over broken boxes and bottles and motioned Izzy and Nell over to that same window, smudged and filthy, with a broken pane at the bottom and glass scattered on the floor. Izzy had recently abandoned a boyfriend and a lucrative law career, and was looking for a perfect place in which to sink her savings and begin a new life. And to this day, Nell swore it was looking out at that mullioned window that did it. The realtor had tugged and pushed at the latch until the windows opened wide, framing the sea and dozens of small boats moored at the seaside harbor. She slipped into the background then, the way that realtors did, leaving Nell and Izzy standing side by side, seeing new beginnings carried in on the waves. "See," said the realtor, with practiced excitement, "you can jump directly into the ocean from these windows." Izzy and Nell had smiled. Neither had been inclined to take the plunge, but they were both lured by the sound of the waves against the stone wall below and the breeze that carried new dreams directly into the knitting room. Not long after that, Belle Endicott built a window seat directly below the windows, and Nell cushioned it with a thick, blue-tufted pad. It was a perfect spot for Izzy's customers and friends. The back room, as it came to be called, was filled with personal things of Izzy's. Uncle Ben's old leather chair, a table that Nell had found at an estate sale over in Rockport, paintings Izzy had bought from local artists on Cannery Cove or Rocky Neck in Gloucestershire. A bank of bookshelves held knitting books, some dog-eared and smudged with coffee. With Nell and Ben's help, the space had been transformed into a cozy, inviting knitting shop, stocked from floor to ceiling with fine hand-dyed yarns and skeins of bright cotton and wool. It drew in townsfolk and summer people alike, a place for friends and strangers to sit and talk and share their knitting passion. That sounds nice, doesn't it? The small rooms grew out of one another like arms of an octopus. One was filled with patterns and soft old chairs to settle into while picking out the perfect hat or sweater. Another held small cubicles filled with baby-fine cottons and cashmere, and dozens of tiny sweaters and pants to lure even the weekend knitter into a project. A side room, Izzy called it the magic room, housed tiny chairs and soft rug, baskets of Izzy's old childhood toys and books, a place for children to play while their moms got help finishing a sweater or picking up stitches or figuring out the intricacies of knitting a Mobius cowl. And everywhere, on walls and tables, there was wooden cubicles or large wicker baskets holding every imaginable kind of yarn: alpaca and cashmeres, wool and cotton, linen and silk, and mohair. The first time Nell had walked through Izzy's shop, once the paint had dried and the cubes and shelves and baskets were filled with soft plush yarn, she had called it Sensory overload. Izzy loved that description. A rich, lovely, sensuous experience. That's what knitting was all about. Bertie looked up from her yarn. Having someone here is comforting, Izzy, and I know for sure it helps your Aunt Nell sleep at night. She lifted her silvery brows and looked over the top of her glasses at Nell. Nell knew there was an unspoken but at the end of Bertie's statement, but at least she understood the feelings that gave birth to a seaside knitting studio, and her own feelings too. Izzy was like a daughter to her, and though Nell didn't expect anyone to break into the shop, Sea Harbor wasn't a high-crime sort of town. It made her feel better knowing that there was someone living there, and it did help Nell sleep better. Bertie was dead on right about that. But this evening, from the sounds of things a floor above, no one or would be sleeping. Good grief, Izzy! Cass Halloran breezed into the room. What's Angie up to? She pulled off her sunglasses and stared at the ceiling. She's energetic, Izzy said. Energetic like Muhammad Ali. Cass's thick black hair was shoved up beneath a Red Sox cap, but the damp strands that curled from beneath it announced that she managed to squeak in a shower after a day of lobstering. Cass lifted her backpack off one shoulder and set it down on the floor beside the fireplace. She walked over to the table where Nell had lined up 4 brown sacks and leaned toward the steam rising from one of them. Ah, Nell, life is good. We needed a cobbler tonight. There's a brisk wind picking up, and something warm and sweet seemed right, Nell said, and she slipped off her suede jacket and hung it on a hook by the back door. Cass nodded. Nasty winds and probably a little rain during the night. The owner of over 200 lobster traps, Cass knew the quirks of New England weather intimately. She glanced out at the windows at the darkening sea. It's almost as if nature needs to show us who's boss. Too many warm summer days need a comeuppance. Cass eyed the food sacks on the table again and put one hand over her flat stomach. It growled beneath her touch. Cass, you'd starve to death if it weren't for Nell. Izzy picked up a basket of yarn and moved them to the coffee table. Of course I would, Cass said. That's why I joined your group, if you remember, Iz. I hate to tell you, but it wasn't your cashmere yarn. When I spotted Nell walking in there that night, trailing the most amazing food orders that ever met this nose, it changed my life forever. I swear it did. Nell remembered the night well, one of those chance events when life's forces line up exactly right. It happened by accident. Izzy kept the Seaside studio open until 7 on Thursday nights, and Nell often stopped by to bring her niece something to eat. Lasagna, scallops, linguine, thin slices of fresh tuna, whatever she had made that day or the night before. One Thursday night, Cass Halloran wandered in to take a look at the new shop, and she smelled garlic clam sauce hidden in Nell's Tupperware container. Cass had looked at it so longingly that Nell went back home and brought the rest of the leftovers from her refrigerator. On impulse, she'd slipped in a freshly baked pie into her sack. Bertie Favazza happened by that Thursday night too, on her way home from Cape Ann nursing home where she taught tap dancing lessons to the residents. She spotted activity through the window and decided she needed a few new skeins of merino wool. Surely Izzy would let her in. Eyeing the clam sauce feast spread out on the table in the back room, Bertie suggested that a cold bottle of Pinot Grigio, which she happened to have in the back seat of her car, would complement the snack nicely. And so the Thursday night knitting group was born. Who knows now, Cass said, inching her way over to the food. If it hadn't been for your clam sauce that night, the world would be short 37 scarves I've worked up in this cozy room. And imagine the fishermen with cold necks who'd be wandering around Sea Harbor. She lifted a plastic lid off of one of the containers. The blended aroma of garlic, butter, and wine curled up into the room. This is just what I needed tonight. Bad day, sweetie? Nell asked. Cass nodded, her thoughts on sneaking a taste of the sauce without Bertie seeing her. Someone was in my traps again, the ones over by the breakwater. You need to get the police on this, Catherine, Bertie said. They won't put up with poachers. They'll hang 'em by their toes. I've talked to them, Bertie, but poachers are hard to catch. I swear, they're like snakes in those black wetsuits, slipping into the water in the middle of the night, or however they do it. Cass began pulling plates from a cabinet beneath the bookcases and sat them, a little too loudly, on the table. I swear I'll get them, one way or another. Nell tugged open another sack. If you need Ben's help with this, Cass, let him know. He'd love to play sleuth, and I don't want you putting yourself in danger. Now there's a thought. There's no one I'd rather sleuth with than Ben Endicott. Cass eyed one of the round brie that Nell had placed on a wooden platter. I think if I could find me a Ben, Nell, I might consider myself getting married myself one day. Well, Nell laughed, that would certainly make your mother happy. But think of the loss in revenue to the church, Izzy said. Mary Halloran keeps the priests in new albs with the candles she lights during her "Please God, let Cass get married and have 7 children" novenas. Nell laughed and set a bowl of spinach on the counter she picked up that day from the garden behind her house. She'd added sliced mango, a handful of sugared almonds, and sourdough croutons. Another thud shook the room, this one sounding like a boot hitting a wall. Bertie put her knitting down on the table and looked up. "Oh, Lordy, I think Angela has just nailed the lid in her coffin. I need to have a word with her." "Oh, shush, Bertie," Nell said. She sprinkled a balsamic dressing on the salad and tossed it lightly. Bertie would fight dragons for her friends, and win, but Angie didn't quite fit into the dragon category, at least not yet. "Any idea what she's up to up there?" Cass asked. Izzy pushed a hank of flyaway hair behind her ear. "She's been preoccupied the last couple of weeks. Probably had a hard day. It happens to all of us. Now, give it a rest. We're here to knit, right?" Before anyone could agree or disagree, the upstairs door slammed shut, footsteps clicked down the staircase along the outer wall of the shop. A second later, Angie opened the side door and stepped inside. "Hi," she said, her carefully made-up eyes looking around the room. She was on stage, dressed for an audience, and all 4 women were momentarily speechless. Angie was nearly 6 feet tall, with thick red hair that framed her narrow face. Trim and fit, she was dressed tonight in camisole, a gauzy see-through blouse, a slim skirt that hugged her hips and stopped above her knees. An elegant cashmere sweater was tied around her shoulders, loose and lovely. Nell looked at the sweater. "Angie, that sweater looks beautiful on you. I volunteered to wear it, but for some crazy reason, Izzy didn't think it would get as much attention on me." Angie touched the cashmere with her fingertips. "Not true, Nell. But when it's on my watch, I'll protect it with my life, I promise. And I'll give it back soon. I just wanted to wear it one more time. It's the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen." "No rush, Ange," Izzy said. "It's a business deal. I get a real live model for my sweater, and you get some warmth." Nell touched the edge of the kimono sweater. Izzy had worked it up in saffron-colored cashmere yarn and knit cables along the front and back. It had a lacy, elegant touch, a unique one-of-a-kind sweater. When Angie had seen the sweater in Izzy's shop, she'd fallen in love with it, and it took one effusive compliment for Izzy to loan it to her. "Just for a while," she'd said. "It's great advertising. People ask where you got it, and then come to visit the Seaside studio." Angie dropped a set of keys down on the table. A knit square with a big A in the center, an old swatch from a wool sweater Izzy had knit for Nell, identified the apartment keys. "Here's that extra set of apartment keys, Iz. I don't need them." "Thanks, Angie. I have a master key, too. But don't worry, I certainly won't go snooping around." Angie's voice was husky, a smoker's voice, though she had assured Izzy she had quit. "Nothing to snoop for. My life's an open book, Iz." Nell watched Angie's self-assured movements as she walked over to the sideboard, peeked beneath one of the lids. Then she turned on boot heels so skinny and tall that Nell wondered how she could possibly remain upright. One slight, awkward movement, and she'd surely break a leg. But Nell noticed something else about Angie tonight, a serious look beneath the mascara and eyeshadow, and her smile wasn't right somehow. Angie's smile was just like her mother, Josie's, a full-lipped kind of smile that could turn heads if she chose to use it. It seemed forced tonight. I love what you've done with this shop, Izzy," Angie said. "It was a disaster before you bought it, a real pit." "And you'll take care not to ravage it?" Bertie asked, speaking up from her post near the fireplace. Her brows arched over her clear eyes. Angie brushed off the comment with a wave of her hand. "Oh, of course not, Bertie. I couldn't get these on is all." She looked down at the tight leather boots hugging her legs. "It irritated me, and I guess I threw one." "Frustrating," she said, her voice dropping and her eyes looking at her boots as if they might have the answer to something she was seeking. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Boots," can be frustrating. Hot date, Angie? Cass had been standing apart from the group, looking out the back windows at the ocean, one knee up on the window seat. She turned now and looked at Angie, her voice flat. For a moment Angie didn't answer. When she spoke, her words were measured and neutral. "Don't worry, Cass. I won't eat him. Pete's a good guy." Before Cass could answer, the back door opened and Pete Halloran's tall body filled the doorway. He stepped inside and pushed the door closed against the force of the wind. "Hi, ladies," he said, looking around the room. "You too, Cass." Cass made a face at her younger brother. "What are you doing here, Pete? Taking up knitting?" Izzy asked. "I hear it has its rewards." Pete eyed the food on the sideboard. "Not until you learn how to knit and purl, Peter." Bertie looked up from a delicate dewdrop stitch she was working on her scarf. "It's becoming quite popular with men, you know. They're finally catching on. They'll never be as accomplished, but they can certainly try." "It's damn near worth it," Pete said, still eyeing the fettuccine. "Not tonight, sweet Pete." Angie came up behind him and looped one arm through his. At Angie's touch, Pete's face turned the color of her hair. He turned toward her with a slow smile creasing his tanned skin. "He's crazy about her," Nell thought, "and they certainly make a striking couple. Pete so tall and sandy-haired, and Angie just a few inches shorter, her cascade of red waves brushing against his shoulder." Nell had seen Pete outside Sea Harbor Historical Museum a day before. He was sitting on a bench in the square, just across the brick road from the library where Angie worked, tossing pieces of sandwich to the gulls, but his mind was clearly not on birds, and Nell had wondered why he wasn't out checking lobster traps with Cass, helping her with the day's catch. Pete hadn't noticed Nell, though, as she moved, though she had waved as she walked past him on her way to a board meeting. Then Angie appeared, walking down the library steps in pencil-thin jeans and bright green sweater, her hair flying in the breeze, her head held high. She still had on the earphones that she wore in the library sometimes, bright orange earphones that looked like daisies and amused older volunteers. The look on Pete's face when he spotted Angie told Nell exactly why he was there. Seeing Pete sitting on the bench, Angie had slipped the earphones down around her neck and then walked across the street, her eyes holding Pete's. She squeezed down beside him on the park bench, one hand reaching in his sack for a sandwich with a familiarity that spoke of more than a casual acquaintance. "Opposites attract," Ben had said when she repeated the scene at supper that night. "Angie needs a nice guy like Pete in her life." Nell had nodded, but wondered if Angie could ever be in anyone's life the way that nice guys needed. Cass walked back to the sideboard, burying her nose in one of Nell's thick sacks. Cass didn't like conflict, and she didn't like Angie, but she loved Nell's cooking, and she fiercely loved her brother Pete. Cass pulled the remaining Tupperware containers from the sack, lining them up on the countertop and immersing herself in the sensory experience of the food. Angie was instantly forgotten, replaced by spices and buttery hunks of lobster and scallops and big globs of sweet baked garlic. "Sorry we can't stay," Pete said. He looked longingly at the food, but one squeeze to his arm from Angie and the roomful of women sensed that even Nell's cooking could be upstaged if the hormones were lined up right. "Watch out for the sweater," Nell said. She bit back a warning to leave the cashmere sweater in Pete's car if even one drop threatened to fall from the sky. Angie smiled at Nell then, and glanced at Cass, and hooked her arm through Pete's. "Pete will keep me warm." Cass kept her back to the couple, blocking out Angie's words. Nell watched the two young people walk through the door and into the night. The look on Angie's face earlier reminded Nell of a young Angie, upset with the world, determined to right its wrongs. Her shoulders held more than a skimpy blouse, a deep tan, a luxurious cashmere sweater. End of chapter 1. A great book. I'm reading it myself. I'm about more than halfway through, and then I gotta get it back to the library. Next week I'll have another book to share with you. I hope you're enjoying this series. Leave a comment, say hello. Talk to you soon. Bye.